On May 27th, it'll be World Atlantic Forest Day. But what do people actually know about the Atlantic forest? Hey!
Hello.
Okay, so can you name a forest that's in Brazil?
You mean like the rainforest, the Amazon?
The Amazon.
The Amazonas.
Hope the Amazon is there. Probably not.
No, it is, yeah. Okay, and how much do you know about the Atlantic forest?
Nothing.
The Atlantic forest is, as far as I recall, an ocean. Maybe the forest is inside the ocean.
That it probably has to do with coral reef, but I'm not really sure about it, to be honest.
Not much. It's a forest. I think I barely even heard of it.
Right, back to the drawing board. The Atlantic forest is situated in South America and stretches along the Atlantic coast of Brazil up until Argentina and Paraguay. It originally covered 1,345,300 square kilometers. That's about as big as the area of the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, and Denmark combined. However, by now only about 16% of the original forest is left. And although it is still one of the most diverse, rich, and distinct forests on Earth, it has become super fragile, and it will take an enormous effort from society to make sure the forest will continue to exist. But why is it so important to conserve the Atlantic forest? Let's ask a local researcher.
So the Atlantic forest is one of the hottest hotspot on the planet. So we have around 1,000 bird species that lives here. So it's 1/10 of the planet. 1/3 of these species are endemic to the region, or more or less. Also, huge biodiversity of amphibians, mammals. Amphibians, in particular, there are a huge number of endemic species here in the Atlantic forest as well. The percentage is huge. So tree species is one of the. So we have more than there's one place in Bahia that they count more than 150 species of trees in 1 hectare. So it's a huge biodiversity. And also we have 100 million people or maybe more living in this area. So it's very, very important for 120 million or so people that lives in the former Atlantic forest distribution. So it's very important in terms of biodiversity, ecosystem services for all these people.
To summarize, the forest provides a home to many people, plants, and animals. Next to that, it also provides so-called ecosystem services. Those are services that an ecosystem gives to us. So, in the example of the forest, that could be cleaned water, heat reduction, or even carbon storage. So it's actually super important to take care of this environment. How come that so much of the forest has been lost?
Yeah, so we historically we built Brazil by destroying the Atlantic forest in the last 500 years. So we start by exporting the Atlantic forest wood, which gives the name to the country. We then planted sugarcane, and then we mine, and then we plant coffee beans, and then and then over and over again. So was basically destroying the Atlantic rainforest that we forge our country. There's no know-how to make money out of the forest standing.
This basically means that a lot of forest has been cut down for, in that moment, a good reason. The problem is, not only is there less forest, and thus less living space for animals and less potential for ecosystem services, but also is the remaining forest very fragmented.
So there is always 2 aspects: the forest loss that's happening and the forest fragmentation. You can have 50% of the forest, and all this forest is all together in the same chunk, or you can have a chessboard and still have 50% of forest.
Like Alex said, the remaining forest is actually spread out in many small pieces, which means that the animals have less space to live and there's less potential for ecosystem services. And because these pieces are quite far away from each other, the animals don't travel in between them, essentially reducing their living space to a minimum. So it's clear that something needs to be done, and indeed, some effort has gone towards halting deforestation and restoring the forest.
Since 2006, we have the Atlantic Forest Law, which protects, in theory, the Atlantic forest, which helped reduce it a lot, the Atlantic forest deforestation. But so far, there are very few and scattered. incentives to restore the Atlantic forest.
Next to the Atlantic Forest Law, a bunch of other initiatives and regulations have been set in place towards halting the deforestation of the Atlantic forest. But in terms of reforestation, not that much progress has been made. And although some areas are regrowing the forest, it's not the same forest as before. The trees are much younger, and they usually grow in marginal lands that were abandoned by agriculture. So, for example, steep hills, south-facing slopes, or low-quality soil. That means that the quality and functioning of the regrowing forest is potentially much lower than that of the original forest that was grown on more fertile lands. But finding a solution is not that easy. There's many people involved in the management and use of the Atlantic forest.
The stakeholders, well, private companies for sure, the government, so there are state governments, municipality governments, and federal government. There are NGOs, there are universities and research institutes. So there are many people. Basically, 60% of the Brazilians live in the Atlantic forest. So there are many people involved in trying to restore or to regenerate parts of the Atlantic forest or reconnect the fragments. Many people involved.
And most of these stakeholders want different things. For example, the farmers want to ensure that they have an income. The politicians want to ensure they get re-elected. The researchers want to ensure that biodiversity is protected. The consumers want to ensure that they can buy food. It's not that easy to find a solution that fits for everyone. This kind of problem is actually called a wicked problem, which is a term that was coined in the 70s. It describes a problem that is almost impossible to be solved because there are so many people involved, there's not enough knowledge on it, and because everything is interconnected. So, what can we do? Researchers often use models to represent complex processes and systems. A model is basically a simplified version of a system that allows us to see interactions more clearly and experiment with different decisions and outcomes. Thus, the better our models represent reality, the better we can understand it and make our decisions. But how can you improve models? One way is to base the models on more accurate evidence. Researcher Sini explains why this helps.
Forest conservation and management are very hot topics often, and people have very strong opinions on whether we should manage, how we should manage, what kind of land uses we should do, where to conserve, how to conserve, etc. And so if we don't use existing evidence and look at what management practices work or how effective they are in certain situations, we may actually end up going with our opinions and wasting lots of resources for potentially no benefit at all. There are two key evidence synthesis methods that we can use to do that: systematic mapping and systematic reviews. Systematic mapping looks at what evidence exists on certain topics, whereas systematic reviews look at the effectiveness of interventions. The better evidence we have behind the model, the stronger the model becomes. If we have evidence from multiple locations, from different settings at different timescales, and we use that evidence in our model, the model can better predict or simulate what happens in real world.
However, good models alone are not enough because they fail to account for the people that make the decisions. For example, most models that try to solve deforestation will usually describe some form of reducing meat consumption as a solution. While eating less meat is undoubtedly important, it won't necessarily solve deforestation. A farmer that is currently earning money through cattle will simply move to a different form of income on their farm. They will most likely not abandon their land, and the forest will not be able to regrow there. This is why we need to bring people into the models. More specifically, the agency of people. Researcher Claude knows more about this.
Agency is our capacity to make decisions and have our own free will. It's not often mentioned, and it's not often well understood or captured by people looking at how landscapes change. Yet, in the Anthropocene, landscapes change because we humans make decisions. It's all about understanding all the stakeholders in the supply chain, all the stakeholders in the decision chain, and first and foremost, those that are in the front line, in direct contact with the forest, because it's their decision, day in, day out, that transform the landscape. And if they were to make different decisions, the landscape will behave differently. So how can you help them make different decisions?
Thus, what Claude says is that we need a model that includes the agency of people and contributes to understanding each other's agency better. This model could come in the form of a strategy game.
Strategy games are very, very well not understood by people when they hear this concept for the first time. We all have games we have an idea of games, and they are often for kids. They are often not taken seriously. But what we actually say is that a game is a model, it's just a formal model, and it's specifically a model to represent strategic interactions. You will take decisions based on what you want in the game, but your outcome will depend on my decisions also. So it's a strategic interaction you and me are having, mediated by the board. I can make a model that is using equations and utility functions, but humans do not use utility functions. This is an image proposed by classical economics, but we are not Homo economicus, we are humans. So what we do in our models, instead of having representations of human decision-making process that are suboptimal, well, we actually put real brains in our games. We ask humans to make decisions in the game, and these decisions are actually shaping the behavior of the model. Then the model becomes the best available representation, to my understanding, of what is going on in the landscape, with the best available representation of human agency.
These games are thus basically more dynamic models that allow for interaction. And, as in every game, the participants must agree on rules. This will open up a conversation between the stakeholders on how they perceive the system and the landscape that they're in, how it works, and what problems they see in it.
For a forester, if there are less trees, it's a problem. But maybe for the Ministry of Agriculture, it's a good thing because that means there's more agricultural land. A trend only becomes a problem when a human being is looking at it with values, interests, needs, and expectations.
So in the end, what makes a successful game isn't necessarily the end outcome, but more the process of getting there. Having stakeholders exchange their understandings and definitions of the system. And quite often, this leads to surprises.
Surprise is actually a physiological process. It's a physiological process about something we go through when what we perceive from the world doesn't match our expectations. This surprise translates the moment where I update my mental model about how the world works. If you can generate surprises in a dialogue, you are actually helping people understand better the system.
Of course, this doesn't solve the issue of deforestation or forest fragmentation just yet. But that's not the goal of the game either. What it does is it helps the participants explore their own values and agency, as well as that of others. They can experiment with ideas, such as forming strategic alliances, and see the outcomes that it has on their landscape. So what you get in the end is stakeholders having a better understanding of the system. And if you think back to the wicked problems we addressed earlier, this better understanding is actually super crucial in finding answers.
One thing, if there is one thing you need to keep of everything I've said so far, is that the strength of humanity is on our collective intelligence. That is humanity's number one strength. The games build on that collective intelligence to find solutions to a problem that is extremely complex, so complex that no single expert has found the answer so far.
So maybe by reconsidering how we look at the problem and what it looks like to different people, we're able to come up with solutions that we haven't thought of before. So now, you're all equipped to celebrate World Atlantic Forest Day and the work of all the researchers that dedicate their life towards it.